Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Model Kit Review. In today's modeling technique video, we will be looking at 3 techniques to detail instrument panels. Detailing the instrument panels is applicable to aircraft interiors. This also applies to model car or model motorcycle builds. The techniques we'll look at in this video include simply brush painting the instrument panel, and I'll go over my technique for that. We'll also look at applying a decal over a raised instrument panel. And the final technique we'll look at is using a photo-etched instrument panel. As different as these techniques seem on the surface, for me at least, there is a lot of overlap in the skills that I use to achieve the final result. And so there's not a whole lot of difference time-wise or work-wise between these 3 techniques. First up, we'll look at brush painting an instrument panel. This panel is from a Tamiya N1K1 Kyofu in 1/48 scale. My first step when I'm painting an instrument panel is to paint it in a dark gray color. I don't usually use a black color, and it helps the dials to pop out a lot more. This particular panel is a little bit lighter than I typically do. Most of the time I use a color that's similar to RLM 72, and that's a dark gray. So I simply brush paint the instrument panel in dark gray. The next thing I do is I apply a pin wash around the dials and in the cracks and crevices, and this also tends to bring out some more of the detail on the instrument panel. After the wash is applied, I take a fine paint brush and I apply black paint to each individual dial. Once the black paint is dry, I take the same brush and I use it to apply some clear into each dial, and that acts as the glass face of each dial. In my case, I use what used to be Future Floor Polish. It is now Pledge Floor Care Multi-Surface Finish. You can dress up the dials even more if you have individual instrument dial faces. You can put those into the instrument dials. For this instrument panel, I did not add the individual dial faces, but I'm happy with the end result, and I think this instrument panel will look really nice through the cockpit canopy. The second method we'll be looking at today is applying a decal over a raised instrument panel. This panel is from an Edward Weekend Edition Spitfire kit in 1/48 scale. My first step with these is obviously applying the decal. Once I apply the decal, I use an extensive amount of setting solution. I come back and I go over the panel several times in order to get everything settled down as much as possible into the dial faces. I let the panel dry overnight and make sure that everything is settled into place. The next step I do is to apply a thin coat of flat clear over the instrument panel itself. This tones down the glossiness of the decal, and it really helps to highlight the clear faces on the gauges when we apply those. Once again, I use a fine paintbrush and some clear coat, and I paint each individual dial with a drop of the clear coat. This picture is from an angle where you can see the clear coat in the dials a little bit. This particular decal didn't line up very well with the raised faces that were on the instrument panel, and so I just did the best I could with this one. This is the end result, and this is going to look just fine through the cockpit canopy. The final technique we'll talk about is using a pre-painted photo-etched set for the instrument panel. This panel is from an Edward Profipac Spitfire Mark 8 in 1/48 scale. To me, the finish on the panel itself is a little bit on the glossy side, so I usually paint the exterior of the panel with a flat clear coat first. As that's drying, I go back and I paint the areas with the instrument faces with a gloss coat. On this kit, that includes the larger lower section in this photo. It also includes the center section of the instrument panel itself where the paintbrush is touching. Once the clear coats have dried, I come back and I carefully cut out each part with a new razor blade. You may have to go back and file the edges a little bit to get any burrs off of the edges of these parts. Once the parts have been separated and cleaned up, they are ready for assembly. For this, I use some of the Tester's Clear Parts cement. I apply a dot of that and then I spread that around with a paintbrush, and construction is just a matter of stacking these parts carefully. Once the assembly has dried, I go back again with some clear and a fine brush, and I fill each dial with a drop of clear coat. So there you have it. These are 3 techniques that allow you to detail out the instrument panel for an aircraft or automotive interior. In my opinion, a good modeler should be comfortable with any of these techniques. And with any of these techniques, you can really achieve a nice result if you take your time and you work through it carefully. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you have a preferred method to detail out the instrument panels in your aircraft or your automotive models, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. And until next time, model on.